This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The UN Climate Conference gets down to business, but how will America's threat to pull out of the Paris Agreement affect momentum there? NATO leaders arrive in the UK for the alliance's 70th anniversary amid tensions between top members. And West African Regional Bloc, ECOWAS, to meet in Abuja to consolidate efforts against jihadists. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. There are more stories coming up in an hour. In business news, the South African regulator orders Vodacom and MTN to lower their tariffs, which are considered too high. And in your sports news, Argentine Lionel Messi claims a record 6th Ballon d'Or award. I'm Hannah Viviers, and I'm going to be with you for the next hour. We have the latest for you live from locations across the globe. In Madrid, Spain, CGTN's Filio Cantafuri is covering day 2 of the UN Climate Conference. In London, we have our reporter Ollie Barrett following the world leaders meeting with the Queen ahead of NATO anniversary tomorrow. Africa Live begins now. We begin with the UN Climate Summit taking place in Madrid this year. It's day 2 of COP25, where over the next 2 weeks, leaders will be negotiating more ambitious plans to limit global warming. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres kicked off the meeting yesterday with a dire warning. He said the world is sleepwalking past the point of no return unless there is immediate climate action. Today, the summit will be receiving an annual update on the global climate indicators with details on temperatures and extreme events. Well, we're staying with that story, and CGTN's Filio Contrafuri is covering the climate conference. She now joins us live from Madrid. Also joining us is Happy Kambule, a climate and energy political advisor at Greenpeace Africa. Thank you to you both for joining us. Filio, I'm going to start with you. What next after yesterday's opening?
Well, you're right. The conference opened yesterday, and today it's slowly getting underway. A lot less cameras and press here, as delegates and world leaders will be coming in to start discussing and negotiating what kind of actions they will undertake in order to tackle climate change. So as the days progress, everybody will be keeping an eye on what will world leaders do and decide, and what the conclusions of this conference will be when they will be announced about 10 days from today. Now, the real talks and negotiations during this UN climate conference are about finalizing and settling any unresolved issues that are left from the 2015 Paris Agreement. And that's critical because the Paris Agreement is supposed to be implemented next year and replace the Kyoto Protocol when it expires. So the focus here on the talks and the negotiations will be on Article 6, and that's about carbon markets. That's about delegations finding consensus about how to regulate this carbon market system that is set. It's aiming to help countries to decarbonize their economies at a lower cost. So once this is done, if this is done, all the mechanisms and the processes of the Paris Agreement will be in place so that it can be implemented next year. And as we've seen so far, it's critical and imperative that those goals that are set by the Paris Agreement will start getting implemented as soon as possible.
Thank you, Filio. We're going to be coming back to you in a moment. Happy, I'm going to come to you now. The UN Secretary General says the situation is dire and the world will soon reach a point of no return on matters of climate change. We've seen the effects here in Africa. When the UN Secretary General describes that point of no return, what would that mean for Africa, Happy?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. What it means for Africa is that if the world does not come together and increase its collective ambition to reduce emissions, we're going to be seeing a lot more of these extreme weather events and also climate-related disasters, particularly when we look at the ones that are permeating right now in a lot of the African countries where we see slow onset droughts. What we are seeing as well is more frequent and intense types of extreme weather events which are linked around our coastal areas, as well as the variability of precipitation, which is becoming very, very unpredictable as well as unmanageable by the intensity that rain is falling when it does happen, as well as understanding that the general heating of Africa is much higher generally for our continent than it is at the global average. So if the global average is 3 degrees, where all our contributions put together are leading us, we're looking at Africa sitting at about 5 to 7 degrees on average.
We're going to be coming back to you, Happy. Filio, there is talk about the U.S. pulling out of the Paris Agreement. How will that affect the deliberations?
Well, actually, President Donald Trump has decided to pull out of the Paris Agreement, and it was actually last month that the United States formally began the process to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, which will take about a year to be completed. Now, the U.S. is present here with a delegation headed by congressional leader Nancy Pelosi, who did say that the U.S., the world can still count on the United States in terms of, this climate change situation. And also Pelosi said that despite the decision for the United States to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, the United States will still do all it can, because a lot of in the United States now in terms of climate action is moving towards a local level, and that's what analysts and experts have also been saying, and that can compensate for the shortcomings on the national level and the shortcomings of the current administration. But at the same time, this delegation will have a lot less leverage on any talks or any negotiations in this conference. And what some analysts and experts have been pointing out is that, some countries can come out and say, countries that could be doing more in climate change, why should I be doing more when the United States, which, is a country that's the #1 contributor to this climate emergency, is doing nothing? And also when world leaders are sitting on a table to try to discuss solutions on the climate change, and the United States, that it's a country that is the second biggest greenhouse gas emitter in the world, is not there. As you can imagine, this creates problems. Back to you.
I'm going to come back to you, Happy. Southern Africa has experienced drought, and here in Kenya, for instance, we've got a lot of rain, and a lot of people are saying that it's very odd for Kenya at this time of year to be having as much rain as we've seen so far. And we're seeing this not just here; we've seen it in Somalia, various parts of Africa that are suffering from extreme weather changes. What would you want to see come out of the Madrid conference, Happy?
So what we would need, at least as a good direction from the conference, again, would be that the countries that are developed are starting to facilitate the necessary means of implementation. So we're talking about the finance that is needed for countries to be able to adapt and to reduce their emissions, which are developing countries. We're also looking at the fact that the collective ambition of all the countries is going to get a lot higher from what the Secretary General has already pleaded to, as well as from the recent UN GAP report. What we're seeing is that the countries that have put stuff on the table is not far enough, whether it's finance, whether it's technology, whether it's capacity building, but particularly around how they're going to be reducing their emissions. So collectively, the ambition of all countries should be increased. But as I said, the main thing is that the means of implementation, so we are able to adapt to climate change and address the extreme weather events, must be facilitated. And if that is the case, and that's what comes out, I think we will be in a better off position as Africa.
Thank you so much to you, Happy Kambule, joining us there. And he is a climate and energy political advisor at Greenpeace Africa. And we were also speaking to CGTN's Filio Kantafuri, who is covering the climate conference. Well, UK's Queen Elizabeth is hosting world leaders at Buckingham Palace ahead of tomorrow's NATO Defence Alliance 70th anniversary. CGTN's Oli Barat is following this story, and he now joins us from London with more. Oli, thank you so much for joining us. What's on the agenda for the Queen's event today?
Well, the Queen will be hosting leaders at Buckingham Palace later on, and the point of that meeting really is to extend some of Britain's pomp and ceremony to the leaders that are in the UK for the NATO summit. Remember that this summit was announced as being hosted by Britain when the previous British government was hoping that by now Brexit would have been done and dusted, and that this NATO summit could show to the world that it still wanted to remain a global player, hence the involvement of the royal family here in the UK over the next couple of days. It's not just the Queen and Buckingham Palace being involved. We know that Prince Charles is hosting tea with US President Donald Trump as well. So certainly various members of the royal family being used during this occasion of the 70th anniversary of the NATO military alliance to try and show that Britain intends to remain very much engaged on the global stage after Brexit, and can also see the Queen sprinkle some of her stardust perhaps over proceedings.
Ollie, NATO members are celebrating the 70th anniversary amid what seems like lukewarm attitudes by leaders of France and the US towards the alliance. What are the expectations and how this event will go, Ollie?
Well, I think NATO would be pretty happy in terms of NATO officials if we got to the end of the summit and there'd be no major controversies, no splits deepening, no tensions rising. So ambition's pretty low, I think. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is using the first day of
We seem to have lost Ollie there. We're going to try and get him back. But in the meantime, let's move on to West Africa, where leaders of the West African Regional Bloc, ECOWAS, are due to meet in Abuja to further consolidate their plans to tackle jihadists. Groups like ISIL and Al-Qaeda have increased their presence in West Africa, and they're stoking ethnic violence in countries like Burkina Faso and Mali. Regional leaders are determined to stop them. But just why is West Africa a preferred target for jihadists? CGTN's Deji Badmos has that report.
Over 2,200 attacks in the last 4 years, 11,500 dead, thousands wounded, millions displaced and economic activities grounded. Those were the grim statistics reeled out by the president of the ECOWAS Commission, Jean-Claude Brou, at the last summit of the regional body in Burkina Faso. There's been several more attacks and deaths since September when the ECOWAS summit held. West Africa, especially the Sahel, is increasingly coming under siege by jihadists.
Islamic State had a lot of challenges in Syria, so they began to throw their lights more towards areas where they could recruit people en masse because of the poverty and the disorganized states, where they could penetrate government systems, move cash, because we have not sanitized our financial system, where they could also strike, hit, and run away, because we had a large mass of unpoliced areas.
It's difficult to tell the actual number of jihadist groups operating in the region, but ISIL and Al-Qaeda are very much active in a large area of ungoverned spaces in the Sahel. For ISIL, the region is becoming its new frontier after it was dislodged from Syria and Iraq, and it's Mali and once peaceful Burkina Faso that are bearing the brunt of the attacks.
If you are able to find out where their funds are coming from, apart from the armed robberies and the kidnappings, leave that out. Where is the main source of income coming from? Once you are able to do that, you weaken them quite to a very, very large extent.
It's something the intelligence agencies of the Sahel and even the Sahara have not been able to crack. Lack of funding also to wage a serious war against the jihadists has helped in giving them some sort of free rein. The G5 Sahel force set up to tackle them has been hampered by poor funding. The leaders of the region have now pledged $1 billion in funding to help get the force to be fully operational. But beyond military force, Analysts say political leaders must work to improve standard of living in the region and create economic opportunities for young people.
If most of our youth are jobless, the truth is that they will take the job from the enemy. If someone's sitting at home, no job, no motivation from the state, and the enemy comes with some dollars and naira, he will go for the enemy's offer. And that is why we need to ensure that we eliminate what we call psychological murder, that is joblessness.
Regional leaders would be meeting in Abuja later this month to finalize discussions on their next approach to dealing with what is fast becoming a huge crisis. The no time is not on their side. How quickly they're able to come up with an effective response to the activities of the jihadists is extremely important, especially for countries like Mali and Burkina Faso that are seemingly becoming overwhelmed by the terrorists. Deja Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, it's time now for us to take a short break and return more news, including experts weigh Africa's progress on the fight against HIV and AIDS at day 2 of their conference in Rwanda. And a protracted industrial action by doctors in Zimbabwe leaves diabetes patients in distress.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, the World Health Organization says Africa has made good progress in the fight against HIV and AIDS in the last 4 decades, but it must marshal more commitment and funding to end the disease. CGTN's Wilkes Anyawa is attending the International Conference on AIDS and STIs in Africa. She now joins us live from Rwanda's capital, Kigali. Wilkester, thank you so much for joining us. What do we expect from today's conference, Wilkester?
Good afternoon, Hannah. Well, the second day of the conference is seeing conversations continue here in Kigali. We do know that the basic idea is to figure out how to work toward an AIDS-free Africa. And therefore, today we are seeing researchers, we're seeing scientists, we're seeing persons living with HIV and AIDS. You're seeing regional leaders going into smaller panels to just discuss, to go into the specific issues that they can address in order to ensure that we're working towards an AIDS-free Africa. And this was also the theme of the opening ceremony on the first day of the conference yesterday, where we did see leaders just talking about the various challenges that their countries continue to face while working towards this target and how they're addressing these issues. Let's have a look and a listen to some of the highlights from the opening ceremony.
Africa is celebrating. Decades worth of hard work is paying off as African countries continue to make great strides in the fight against HIV and AIDS. Globally, there are 39.7 million people living with HIV and AIDS. Of these, 75% live in Africa, and Africa is now feeling the impact of the different approaches governments and organizations have employed to tackle the epidemic.
Millions of people are on treatment. Even better, millions of people are not on treatment because they have the tools to protect themselves. We have accelerated research and development. We have pushed back the boundaries of science and are now in hot pursuit of a cure.
Rwanda is one of the countries that are on course down a path agreed on by governments across the world.
In 2014, UNAIDS launched the Fast Track initiative, calling for the scaling up of HIV prevention and treatment programs to reduce new infections. It also launched the 90-90-90 targets. But what exactly does this mean? Governments agreed to ensure that among their citizens, 90% of people living with HIV to be diagnosed, 90% of those diagnosed to access antiretroviral therapy, and 90% of those accessing treatment to get viral suppression, meaning the virus is undetectable and therefore impossible to spread. Rwanda is leading the pack.
97% of HIV-positive people in Rwanda are on treatment. And 90% are suppressing the viral loads.
Other countries continue to grapple with a myriad challenges.
The gains we have made are under threat, with the signs of wavering political commitment and declining funding.
Health is about making good choices right now for benefits that may only be felt years later. Ultimately, this is what will enable us to win this fight against HIV and AIDS.
In other countries, key populations such as men having sex with men, transgender communities, and sex workers remain overlooked. But in all instances, experts agree that in order to work toward an Africa free of AIDS, Africa must secure political commitment, especially to fund healthcare, tap into communities to meet their needs, and unlock innovations in order to win the war against HIV and AIDS. Wilkisa Nyabwa, CGTN, Rwanda.
Oh, staying with you, Wilkester, what happens at the end of this conference and how will the resolutions affect African governments?
Well, Hannah, the most interesting thing at this point is that those commitments have already been made. When you look at the 90-90-90 commitment, that is a commitment that was already made years ago, as well as the Fast Track initiative. And countries have already agreed to work toward ending AIDS in Africa by 2030. So these are commitments that have already been made. But at this conference, this is a forum and an opportunity for basically various stakeholders to just sit down and deliberate to figure out where are we now, what are we doing right, what can we improve on, what has someone else done well that we can also adopt, so that there are basically 11 years left, and so everybody trying to figure out how to maximize the gains within that time. One of the issues that have come up for discussion is the issue of funding, because this is a really major thing that even in countries where there is political commitment, finding the money to ensure that everybody is tested, everybody can access antiretroviral therapy, that is a challenge, remains a challenge. And there are also other just discussions about specifics, about different innovations, about how different countries have tackled different things like self-testing HIV kits for communities or individuals who might not want to go over the counter. So I would say that at this particular forum, it is mostly an opportunity for people to take stock of where they are, how to improve, how to learn from their neighbors, and then take that home and try to apply it within the next 11 years so that in 2030, Africa will feel the impact of such meetings and such conferences. Hannah.
Thank you so much, Wilkester Wigasanyawa, joining us live from Kigali, Rwanda. Well, protracted industrial action by doctors in Zimbabwe has put some diabetes patients at risk, especially as some can no longer get the much needed and regular attention their condition requires. Here's CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya with more from Harare.
Pamizai Muzereni was diagnosed with diabetes in 1995. She needs insulin injections 3 times a day, every day. It's been difficult to keep up with her regimen since the doctors went on strike.
Medication is expensive in private pharmacies, so I get it from the government facility. However, I cannot buy it without a prescription. Last month, I couldn't find a doctor at Harare Hospital to write one for me because there was only one attending to the whole hospital.
A friend who's a nurse eventually wrote her one. The impasse between doctors and government has also exposed her to the unpredictable highs and lows of her condition.
When I go for reviews, I show my doctor my daily readings. But because I have not been going for checkups, lately my sugar level went too low last month and no one detected it. I ended up having seizures. I felt like I was about to die.
Others haven't been so lucky. Several avoidable deaths have been reported because hospitals aren't operating at full capacity. With the strike stretching into a third month, President Emmerson Mnangagwa issued a moratorium for fired doctors to return to work with no questions asked. The Health Services Board says some doctors have taken advantage of the moratorium but can't confirm exact numbers just yet. In the meantime, government says it's working to address the junior doctors' grievances in a bid to try and get services inside public hospitals back to normal.
We want to be able to get some more equipment, and we're in the process of finalizing, some facilities, with the Treasury so that we can be able to get equipment. Government has always said they will always look at improving, the conditions of service. I think we should allow that process to also happen.
That may require time, which many unwell people here can't afford to spare. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
You're watching Africa Live. Well, the first vertical forest in Africa and the Middle East will be established in Egypt's new administrative capital. It's an idea based on building houses that are covered in greenery. The aim is to save on energy consumption and create an environmentally friendly atmosphere. Yasser Hakim met with Mohammed Hani Al-Assal, the real estate developer behind this project.
How did the idea come in place? How did you know about this and decided to bring it to Africa and the Middle East for the first time?
I saw it in Europe, specifically in Milan, and I said, why not have a building that is environmentally friendly and can attract tourists and become a landmark? There's nothing like it here, so we decided to construct the vertical forest in the new administrative capital, which is the largest project in the Middle East at the moment.
What are the unique aspects of having the vertical forest here in Egypt?
There are 3 huge buildings that are fully covered by trees. In the summer, the trees protect the house from the heat, but allow sunlight in, so it keeps the house cool. In the winter, the leaves fall off, allowing the sun in to warm the house. Studies show that you save 30% of energy consumption on heaters or air conditioning in the vertical forest buildings. It also produces more oxygen in the area. In our buildings, there will be about 400 trees with heights from 3 to 6 meters and about 2,000 plants.
Can you tell us more details about the project itself, the size, and when it will be delivered?
The vertical forest is part of a 200-acre real estate development project called IL Bosco, which includes villas and apartments. The 3 buildings of the vertical forest will consist of 350 to 400 hotel residences and 500 apartments. The cost of constructing the vertical forest alone is about $188 million, while the investment in the IL Bosco project as a whole is $1 billion. We will begin construction in the 3rd quarter of 2020 and deliver in mid-2023.
Which designer are you trying to work with, and what is he trying to apply here in Egypt?
The designer is Stefano Bueri. This is the only firm that owns the loyalties and rights for the vertical forest. He has received the award for the best building in the world in 2015 for his vertical forest building in Milan. We're going to use his know-how to build the similar houses here. We're also working hard on a plan to construct more vertical forests in other areas in the future.
Thank you very much for joining us here on CGTN.
Well, Tunisia is one of the leading nations in the Arab region credited with championing women's and children's rights. The North African country has ratified treaties and conventions that criminalize all forms of child marriages. This has led to a significant decline in the number of young girls who are forced into marriage.
Tunisia ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child in 1992, which sets a minimum age of marriage of 18, and the Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, in 1985, which obligates states to ensure free and full consent to marriage.
Since 1956, the Personal Status Code had determined the legal age of marriage. The Tunisian state does not tolerate, accept, or recognize any marriage below 18.
In July 2017, the Tunisian parliament scrapped a loophole in the legislation that allowed rapists to avoid jail by marrying their victims and recognizing pregnancy from rape. Now the perpetrator can no longer escape jail sentences.
Sometimes a young girl who is victim of rape or sexual abuse is forced by her family to marry her aggressor. This is inhuman and illegal. It's only possible and allowed by court in rare cases when the victim is a woman and not a girl, and if she accepts voluntarily without pressure from the family.
The public opinion has backed the civil society in its Girls Not Brides campaign, which is committed to ending child marriage and enabling girls to fulfill their potential.
Every girl has the right to live the life that she chooses. She can study and work to become an active member in the society. Ending child marriage is a shared responsibility.
Experts assert that child marriage compromises girls' development and often results in early pregnancy and social isolation. Now millions of Tunisians view this phenomenon that continues to ruin the lives of girls in the world as a backward and criminal practice.
Social scientists argue that the Tunisian mentalities have changed and evolved over the past 50 years. The traditional marriage is still widespread in inner regions, but child marriage has nearly disappeared because it is both illegal and rejected by the Tunisian society. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, after the break is your business news. Here's what you can expect. A South African regulator orders Vodacom and MTN to lower their data prices. And the U.S. considers tariffs on French goods as well as steel and aluminum for Brazil and Argentina.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. It's time now for your business news. South Africa's Competition Commission has accused Vodacom and MTN of excessive pricing of data. The telecoms firms say could face prosecution if they do not agree to lower tariff levels in the next 2 months. The data services inquiry, which was launched in August of 2017, is in response to complaints by consumers. In the final report, the Commission recommended that the mobile operators independently reach an agreement on substantial reductions. Preliminary evidence suggests that there is scope for price reductions in the region of 30 to 50%. The firms are also expected to cease ongoing partitioning and price discrimination strategies that may facilitate greater exploitation of market power. The Central Bank of Nigeria says it will intensify policy measures to get around $4 billion in non-oil export revenue next year. The move is part of ongoing efforts to reduce Nigeria's dependence on crude oil for foreign exchange. CGTN's Ejek Mangut brings us up to speed.
Thus far this year, revenue from agricultural produce, manufactured goods and raw materials has earned Nigeria $2 billion. The central bank target is to double that. Two Nigerian banks, that's the Apex and Nigeria Export-Import, are offering a total of $1.4 billion in loans to local manufacturers and producers. Businesses will be lent the money at rates of less than 10% to enable them expand their production. Now, the central bank governor in June predicted that the country's economic growth will be in the double digits by 2024. But Nigeria has long struggled to generate a foreign exchange from revenue from sources other than its main export, that's crude oil. The country lost an estimated $2.8 billion in revenues in 2018, mainly due to a slump in oil prices and oil-related crimes like pipeline vandalism, illegal oil bunkering and theft. The government hopes that revenue generated outside oil will help in the provision of basic amenities and infrastructural development and the overall improvement of the well-being of Nigerians. Ejek Mangut, CGTN, Abuja.
As NATO meets in London, two members of the military alliance are squabbling over tariffs. U.S. trade officials say President Donald Trump is considering extra tariffs on $2.4 billion worth of French goods. The proposed action includes additional duties on some French champagne, handbags, and other products. Earlier, we spoke to CGTN's Joey Rittenberg about what the U.S. is trying to achieve.
To really understand what Washington is doing, you have to understand what Paris did first. France's Senate voted last month, gave final approval for a so-called digital tax. That's a 3% levy on big tech firms that will be applied retroactively to the start of 2019. Now, their aim is to raise around $850 million in revenue and to get these companies to start paying more taxes. We're talking about Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple, really big American global firms. And right now, most pay little or no tax in countries where they don't have a physical presence. So France's move is really just part of the latest effort to change that. But the Trump administration, well, they're not too happy about it. It conducted so-called Section 301 investigations into this French tax, the same sort of investigative process, we should note, that it applied to China's practices, which, as we know, resulted in a full-out trade war. Now, those 301 investigations, they've concluded, and the senior U.S. trade representative, Robert Lighthizer, suggested that Donald Trump, the U.S. president, could announce a tariff of up to 100% on French items, like you said, champagne, cheese, handbags, all these things that American consumers really love to consume. Now remember, this could still go away. Trump, as you mentioned, is in London for the NATO summit. He's due to meet with Macron this week, and Macron has already said that his country's digital tax could be scrapped if a similar international agreement could be reached. And some analysts are already suggesting that this announcement by the American trade rep is really just part of the White House's negotiating strategy.
Well, France wasn't the only country on America's tariff radar on Monday. President Trump also announced that tariffs on steel and aluminum from Brazil and Argentina in a tweet. The president cited alleged currency manipulation by Brazil and Argentina, which he says is hurting American farmers. CGTN's Joel Richards reports.
Before departing for the NATO summit in London, US President Donald Trump reinstated tariffs on steel and aluminium imports from Brazil and Argentina because of their currency devaluations.
Well, Brazil has really discounted. If you take a look at what's happened with their currency, they've devalued their currency very substantially by 10%. Argentina also. And I gave them a big break on tariffs. But now I'm taking that break off because it's very unfair to our manufacturers and very unfair to our farmers. Our steel companies will be very happy and our farmers will be very happy with what I have.
Both Argentina and Brazil were among the few countries to receive tariff exemptions on steel and aluminium imports to the US last year. In the case of Argentina, exports to the US amounted to around $700 million in 2018. This decision is an about-face in what appeared to be a strong relationship between the leaders. Trump has expressed admiration for his populist counterpart in Brazil, President Jair Bolsonaro.
He has done a very outstanding job, ran one of the incredible campaigns. Somebody said it a little bit reminded people of our campaign, which I'm honored by.
And Trump's personal relationship with Argentine President Mauricio Macri goes back decades. But it's not enough to offset Trump's concern over US trade losses that Washington blames on Brazil and Argentina's tumbling currencies. Few observers have suggested that the Brazil real and the Argentine peso's devaluation is the result of currency manipulation. Both central banks have stepped in this year to prop up the currencies, and most analysts agree that the devaluation is the result of market forces, as both the South American economies are struggling. But the peso and real devaluation has made these two agricultural powerhouses more competitive, and US losses have been Latin America's gain. Both Argentina and Brazil have taken advantage of the US-China trade war to sell more grain to Beijing. Argentina and Brazil both said they are surprised by the announcement and will not only seek clarification but also to try to reverse Donald Trump's decision. Joel Richards, CGTN, Buenos Aires.
More news after the break, including African emojis catching on fast in Côte d'Ivoire.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, the African hair market is a billion-dollar industry. Here in Kenya, it's worth around $124 million with an annual growth rate of 7%, according to a 2017 Euromonitor study. Currently, companies providing products for natural African hair are casting their nets far and wide to get their footing in the market. CGTN's Jen Keo reports.
It's been almost a decade of Kenyan women gushing over the natural hair craze. Over time, companies have caught on to the trend and entered the market, promoting products for natural listers regimens. Tabitha Tongoi has been a natural hair blogger for over 4 years and has worked with 60 companies, all seeking to secure their share of consumers.
It actually technically should be cheaper because it's growing out of your head. It's like your eyebrows, your eyelashes, you never have to budget for them. But I think the community online, because naturalistas and the natural community has mainly grown online, has had a very strong product push, and so then it becomes expensive.
From newcomers to veterans, the retail chains are now spoiled for choice as thousands of products line the shelves.
Case in point, we did a consumer immersion and we'd gone to, I'm going to bash it so bad, Ufafa Jericho. And there were ladies there who are living in ramshackle homes, but they showed us weaves and wigs that they bought worth 20,000, 30,000. You know, so I think a woman takes her beauty very seriously, very personally.
Not very far from Yaya.
These businesses were looking for one thing at the Tricious Hair Festival market. For Christina Mimo, it was affordability.
Well, the price range is good for, well, you need to save up. Let's just say they need to be budgeted for. It's not a purchase maybe if you're a student that you can make on impulse. So maybe just a bit of planning, but they are quite fair priced.
Quality remains key in the natural hair industry, with many consumers expecting the best results.
There are those who jump on the gravy train. For example, there are some companies which they are somewhere in, some country and they say XYZ product for natural hair. But really when you look at the formulation, the ingredients are not that good.
Michelle Ntalami came up with the idea to start her own company, Marini Naturals, in 2013.
I feel like a lot of companies say they are natural, but they're not. But there's a very simple test for that. Even with Kebs, your products have to be at least 60% all natural ingredients. Marini's is 80%. And then the rest of it is already natural components like water and all that. So I think it really depends on the integrity of the brand and the company.
Mainstream businesses are now going head-to-head with smaller startups that are keen to work directly with their customers. The real determinant of their success, however, remains in the hands of the millennial buyer, who picks and drops trends within a very short cycle. Jane Kale, CGTN.
In Cote d'Ivoire, mobile phone users are ditching the old-fashioned yellow emojis and downloading Zuzukwa. It's an African version of emojis which truly resonates with today's vibrant youth. Designed by Ivorian student Opleru Gabe, the emojis based on African expressions, transport vehicles, typical dishes, traditional masks and clothes that are a huge success. There have been 130 downloads of the emojis in just a few months. CGTN's Terry Wangari has more.
Hello, I am Opleru, graphic artist and creator of Zuzukwa, African emojis. Welcome to Abidjan.
He began creating the emojis in 2017 and sought inspiration from the streets of the capital, Abidjan, everyday life and his friends.
As an African and as an Ivorian, we have our own codes. For example, in a conversation you will say, "Ah?" You won't find that in the traditional emojis. So thanks to Zuzukwa, we can send an expression like this, and automatically the conversation flows more easily. Or for example, "Sorry," we do it like this.
The app has familiar expressions for sorry, shocked or embarrassed, which don't exist in the original little yellow emojis that are universally available on smartphones. Food features prominently in the app, including the national Ivorian dish gabra, made of manioc semolina, grilled tuna and hot chili peppers.
It is a very popular dish here, which has really good taste and fills you up quickly. This is one of the places that inspired me. I even did 3 emojis of this dish first, and there is the fork for gaba, which is used to choose the fish you eat. And I did 2 versions of the gaba in a plate and the other version wrapped in leaves.
The young designer said it takes him 4 hours to design one emoji. He's created one a day, which amounts to 1,504 hours and 376 days of designing. The 376 emojis are now available on his app and download is free.
It saves time and allows you to transmit emotions faster. When you write something with text, you don't get the emotion really. But with emojis, you can really express a lot more emotions.
It's obvious to me that we needed these emojis. The emojis in which we recognize ourselves, that translates our day-to-day, our reality, and obviously, since emojis are elements that help us identify each other, if they're African, you can't get any better than that, really.
Today, the emojis have been downloaded 100,000 times on Play Store and more than 30,000 on the Apple Store, with all the designs available on his Instagram page. App has also been nominated for the African Talent Awards Best App category. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
A fascinating story. We're going to take a short break and return your sports news, including Argentine Lionel Messi claims a record 6th Ballon d'Or award.
How would you create your legend?